On a cold January evening in 2014, police were called to a quiet suburban home in Brookhaven, Georgia. Inside, they found a scene that would shock the entire community. The lifeless body of 18-year-old Heather Malone sprawled across the living room floor. What appeared at first to be a tragic incident soon unraveled into a sinister tale of obsession, betrayal, and violence. At the center of this chilling story was Nathan Ellis, a man who seemed to have it all. At just 28 years old, Nathan wasn't just the new basketball coach at Brookhaven High School. He was a charismatic leader, a mentor, and someone who had a knack for inspiring loyalty. His players adored him, not only for his coaching skills but for his genuine care about their growth on and off the court. Nathan's personal life appeared to mirror his professional success. Married to his college sweetheart, Hannah, in a picture-perfect ceremony in April 2012, he seemed to embody the ideal of a man who had everything going for him. But beneath this polished facade, a dark and tangled web of secrets was beginning to take shape, a web that would ultimately spiral out of control. It all started in the fall of 2013, when Nathan crossed paths with Heather Malone, a bright and ambitious high school senior. Their relationship began innocently enough but quickly veered into dangerous territory. What followed was a series of events fueled by jealousy, manipulation, and obsession, a deadly cocktail that would culminate in a night of unimaginable violence. Hannah Ellis was everything Nathan could have hoped for in a partner. A beloved kindergarten teacher known for her gentle nature and unwavering patience, she was the type of person who lit up every room she entered. Together, she and Nathan had just moved into a cozy, three-bedroom house on the edge of Brookhaven, a place they lovingly referred to as their forever home. Though modest in size, the house brimmed with potential. A spare room they jokingly called the nursery sat waiting for the day it would be filled with the sound of a baby's laughter. The backyard, with its towering oak tree, seemed destined for a swing set in summer barbecues. Their lives were painted with the kind of hopeful brushstrokes that made people envy their love story. For Nathan, however, the transition into married life was more complex than he anticipated. Juggling the demands of his new role as head basketball coach and his commitment to Hannah left him feeling stretched thin. But Hannah, ever the optimist, reassured him at every turn. "Follow your passion," she would say with a smile, "we'll always find time for each other." On weekends, they would decorate their home, dreaming of the family they hoped to build. Hannah even began jotting down baby names in a small notebook she kept by their bedside, a tender reminder of the future they were planning together. But while the Elisas were building a foundation of love and dreams, Heather Malone was living a very different reality. At just 17, Heather was the epitome of high school glamour. As the star cheerleader of Brookhaven High, her striking looks and infectious energy made her the darling of the school. She was the girl everyone wanted to befriend, or be. But behind her dazzling smile lay a far darker truth. Heather's childhood was riddled with chaos. Her parents' toxic, screaming matches had defined much of her early years until her father finally walked out when she was 10. Her mother, drowning in alcoholism, barely managed to keep their crumbling apartment livable. For Heather, survival meant learning to fend for herself, to mask her pain with perfection, and to use her charm as a weapon. But no amount of attention from peers could fill the void in her heart. Deep down, Heather was a girl starved for love and stability. She yearned for someone who would see beyond her polished exterior, who could offer her the care and validation she had never known at home. And in the fall of 2013, Heather found that someone in Nathan Ellis. It started innocently enough. By September, Nathan had already earned a reputation as a coach who truly cared. He stayed late after practices, working one-on-one with players who needed extra help. Heather, who often lingered in the gym after cheerleading practice, began to notice him. At first, it was just a harmless crush, a schoolgirl infatuation with the confident, charismatic man who commanded the basketball court. She admired the way he motivated his players, the warmth in his laugh, and the way he seemed to make everyone feel seen and valued. Heather started making excuses to stay later and later. She claimed she was practicing routines, but her eyes were always on Nathan. It wasn't long before she began striking up conversations. "Coach Ellis, you're amazing with the team," she would say, her voice dripping with admiration. Nathan, flattered but oblivious to her deeper intentions, would thank her and go back to his work. "Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring you more incredible stories." For Heather, however, these small exchanges were like sparks in dry grass. She craved more. What started as fleeting moments of admiration quickly grew into a dangerous fixation. Nathan, caught up in the demands of his job and his home life, didn't notice the subtle ways Heather began inserting herself into his orbit. But those around them did. And soon, the lines between professional and personal would blur in ways that no one could have predicted. To Heather Malone, Nathan Ellis wasn't just a coach, he was the savior she had always dreamed of. Confident and charismatic, he carried himself with a sense of authority that commanded respect from his players while remaining approachable, a balance that mesmerized her. In Nathan, Heather saw a man who could rescue her from the chaos of her home life, a man who made her feel special in ways no one else ever had. For Nathan, Heather's attention was flattering in a way that caught him off guard. Balancing the demands of being a newlywed and a coach had been more draining than he anticipated. Late nights spent poring over game strategies left little time for his wife, Hannah, who was equally consumed with her own responsibilities as a kindergarten teacher. So when Heather began offering compliments, praising his leadership, admiring his dedication, Nathan felt a sense of validation he hadn't even realized he craved. By October 2013, their interactions became increasingly frequent. Heather found excuses to linger after practice, striking up conversations that began innocently enough. She would ask for advice about school or request help with her cheer routines, always careful to frame their discussions as casual. Nathan, ever polite and unwilling to dismiss her, obliged. At first, their exchanges were light-hearted, but Heather's charm and vulnerability began to draw Nathan in. Heather wasn't shy about opening up. She spoke candidly about her struggles at home, the chaos of living with an alcoholic mother, the emptiness left by an absent father, and the loneliness that came with pretending to be perfect. Nathan's instinct to mentor and protect kicked in. He saw her as a troubled young woman who needed guidance, but there was an intensity in her gaze that made him uneasy. One evening in late October, the boundaries between them began to blur. Nathan was working late in his office when Heather knocked, claiming she had left her phone in the gym. She lingered longer than necessary, thanking him for always being kind to her. Then, in a voice tinged with emotion, she admitted how much she admired him, not just as a coach, but as a person. "You're the only adult who actually cares about me," she said, her eyes glistening. Nathan felt an uncomfortable mix of emotions, pity, pride, and something else he couldn't quite name. In that moment, Heather wasn't just a student anymore, she was a girl looking at him with admiration and longing. The lines of their relationship were no longer clear, and Nathan, though uneasy, didn't push her away. By November, their private conversations had become routine. What started as harmless chats in the gym turned into late-night meetings in Nathan's office. Heather began testing boundaries, dressing provocatively during practice and finding reasons to brush against him during their talks. Nathan rationalized these interactions, convincing himself that he was simply being a mentor, offering stability in Heather's turbulent world. But Heather had no intention of staying within the bounds of professionalism. She craved Nathan's full attention and grew frustrated whenever he tried to distance himself. She started texting him outside of school, using flirty yet veiled language to keep him engaged. Nathan, battling a growing sense of guilt, struggled to maintain control of a situation that was spiraling out of hand. In December 2013, their relationship crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. After a late-night home game, Nathan found himself alone in the gym with Heather. The tension between them, simmering for months, finally reached its breaking point. Under the dim glow of the gym lights, in the stillness of the empty room, they shared an intimate moment that neither could take back. Nathan left that night drowning in guilt, haunted by the betrayal of his wife and the moral line he had shattered. But Heather was exhilarated. For her, this was the beginning of a bond she had fought to create, a connection she wasn't willing to let go of. Their affair became a carefully hidden secret, a tangled web of stolen moments under the bleachers and hushed whispers in Nathan's office. Heather maintained her outward image as the perfect cheerleader, but inside, her obsession with Nathan consumed her. She wanted him completely, and the thought of sharing him with anyone, especially his wife, was unbearable. For Nathan, the relationship became a source of constant torment. He loved Hannah deeply and hated himself for betraying her, but he felt trapped by Heather's grip. Every time he tried to pull away, she found a way to draw him back in, using her vulnerability and charm as weapons. By January 2014, the cracks in their fragile secret began to show. Heather's demands for Nathan's time and attention grew relentless. She wanted more reassurance, more promises, more of Nathan's life, and she wasn't afraid to push boundaries to get it. What had once been thrilling for Nathan now felt suffocating, and he began to fear the consequences of their relationship unraveling. But Heather wasn't about to let go easily. Her fixation on Nathan had morphed into something darker, something far more dangerous. And as their secret teetered on the edge of exposure, the stage was set for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. To Heather Malone, the announcement of Hannah's pregnancy was not just devastating, it was a betrayal. In her mind, Nathan belonged to her. She had risked everything for him, and the idea that he was building a life with Hannah, a life that now included a child, was too much for her to bear. That night, Heather didn't go home. Instead, she sat in her car in the school parking lot, tears streaming down her face as her mind raced with emotions she couldn't control. The image of Nathan smiling at Hannah, his hand resting protectively on her belly, played on a loop in her head, feeding the fire of her jealousy and rage. Heather felt discarded, replaced, and unimportant. A toxic cocktail of emotions that pushed her obsession to dangerous new heights. The following weeks were a whirlwind of erratic behavior. Heather became even more possessive, bombarding Nathan with texts and calls at all hours of the day and night. Her messages alternated between desperation and anger. "How could you do this to me?" one text read. "Do you even care about me at all?" came another, followed minutes later by, "I know you're thinking about me. You always do." Nathan, terrified of how far Heather might go, began to distance himself. He ignored her messages, avoided being alone in the gym, and even altered his daily routine to minimize the chances of running into her. But Heather was relentless. She showed up unannounced at practices, her piercing gaze following his every move, her presence an unspoken threat he couldn't escape. For Heather, Nathan was no longer just a man she admired, he was her world. She had no one else, no family to comfort her, no real friends to ground her. Her grades plummeted, and she stopped attending cheerleading practice altogether, claiming she was sick whenever her coach asked. The truth was, Heather was unraveling, consumed by an obsession that left no room for anything, or anyone, else. The breaking point came on a warm evening in September. Nathan was locking up the gym after practice when he turned to find Heather waiting for him, her face a mixture of anguish and fury. "You've been ignoring me," she said, her voice trembling. "Heather, this has to stop," Nathan replied, trying to keep his tone calm but firm. "Whatever this is, it's over. It should never have started." But Heather didn't back down. She stepped closer, her eyes welling with tears. "You can't just walk away from me," she said, her voice rising. "You promised you cared about me. You made me believe I mattered to you." Nathan tried to reason with her, but Heather wasn't listening. In her mind, Nathan was hers, and the thought of losing him to Hannah, or anyone, was unbearable. That night, as Nathan drove home, he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. By October, Heather's behavior had grown even more alarming. She began showing up outside Nathan and Hannah's home, watching from her car as they went about their lives. One evening, Hannah spotted her sitting in the driveway and mentioned it to Nathan, who brushed it off as a coincidence. But deep down, he knew Heather was spiraling, and he feared the consequences of her obsession. Heather, meanwhile, was devising a plan. She couldn't let Nathan slip away, not when she had sacrificed so much for him. The idea of confronting Hannah began to take root in her mind. In Heather's twisted logic, Hannah was the obstacle standing between her and the life she deserved with Nathan. On the evening of October 28, Heather showed up at the Ellis home. Clutching a handwritten letter in her trembling hands, she rang the doorbell, her heart pounding in her chest. When Hannah opened the door, Heather's carefully rehearsed speech crumbled. The sight of Hannah, glowing with the joy of impending motherhood, sent a fresh wave of rage coursing through her. "I need to talk to Nathan," Heather said, her voice sharp. Hannah, taken aback but polite, replied, "He's not home right now. Is there something I can help you with?" Heather's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to see him. He's everything to me." Hannah, now visibly uncomfortable, tried to close the door, but Heather pressed her hand against it. "You don't deserve him," she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "You don't know him like I do." Before Hannah could respond, Heather turned and stormed off, her mind racing with emotions she couldn't contain. That night, Nathan returned home to find Hannah shaken, recounting the strange encounter. Nathan assured her it was nothing, but inside, he knew the situation was spiraling out of control. As the days turned into weeks, Heather's behavior grew more erratic. She began showing up at Nathan's games, standing in the front row and glaring at Hannah with an intensity that unsettled everyone around her. Nathan, desperate to protect his wife and unborn child, considered going to the school administration or even the police. But he feared what Heather might do if he pushed her too far. By December, Heather was a shadow of the girl she once was. Her obsession with Nathan had consumed her entirely, leaving no room for logic or reason. She was prepared to do whatever it took to keep him in her life, even if it meant destroying everything, and everyone, in her way. The storm that had been building for months was about to break, and when it did, the fallout would leave no one untouched. By January 2014, Heather Malone's descent into darkness was complete. The bright, popular cheerleader who had once commanded attention for her beauty and charm was now a shadow of her former self. Her obsession with Nathan Ellis had consumed her entirely, and any trace of rational thought or morality had been replaced by a relentless determination to possess him at all costs. Nathan, on the other hand, was living in a waking nightmare. The loss of their child had shattered both him and Hannah, leaving an unbridgeable chasm in their marriage. Hannah was drowning in grief, her once radiant smile now a distant memory. Nathan, burdened by guilt and fear, couldn't bring himself to confess the truth about his affair with Heather, not even after everything that had happened. But his silence came at a cost. Heather, emboldened by the chaos she had sown, was far from finished. Heather's texts had escalated from desperate pleas to outright threats. Messages like, "You think you can ignore me? You don't know what I'm capable of," filled Nathan's phone, each one more chilling than the last. She began leaving notes on his car, cryptic messages written in red ink that hinted at violence. And then there were the late-night calls. Nathan would answer, only to hear Heather breathing on the other end, a wordless reminder that she was always watching. Hannah, unaware of the full extent of Heather's obsession, tried to focus on rebuilding her life. She poured her energy into her kindergarten classroom, finding solace in the innocent laughter of her students. But even at school, she couldn't escape the shadow of Heather. One day, Hannah found an anonymous note in her mailbox. It read, "You're standing in my way. Step aside, or I'll make you disappear." The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the menace was unmistakable. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring you more incredible stories. Nathan knew he couldn't keep running from the situation. He had to put an end to Heather's reign of terror. He began documenting everything, her texts, the notes, the missed calls. He considered going to the authorities, but the thought of his affair becoming public was paralyzing. It would destroy his career, his reputation, and what little was left of his marriage. But as January progressed, it became clear that Heather wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted, or until someone got hurt. On the night of January 23, 2014, everything came to a head. Nathan had stayed late at the school, using the quiet of the empty gym to prepare for an upcoming tournament. As he locked up and stepped into the cold night air, he noticed a figure waiting by his car. It was Heather. Her face was pale, her eyes wild with a mix of desperation and fury. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. Nathan shook his head. "There's nothing left to say, Heather. This has to stop." But Heather wasn't listening. She stepped closer, blocking his path. "You don't get to walk away from me," she hissed. "I gave up everything for you, Nathan. You owe me." Nathan's patience snapped. "I owe you nothing," he shouted. "This was a mistake I regret every single day. You need help, Heather. Please, just leave me and my family alone." Heather's expression shifted, her desperation turning to rage. "Your family?" she spat. "You think she's your family? She's nothing. She doesn't understand you like I do. She doesn't deserve you." Nathan, feeling the situation spiraling out of control, tried to move past her. But Heather grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. "If I can't have you," she whispered, "no one can." Hours later, Nathan arrived home to find the lights in the living room still on. He stepped inside, calling out for Hannah, but the house was eerily silent. As he moved into the living room, his heart stopped. Hannah was lying on the floor, motionless. The scene was chaotic, overturned furniture, shattered glass, and a dark stain spreading across the carpet. And standing over her was Heather, holding a knife, her hands trembling. "She wouldn't listen," Heather said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I told her to leave. I told her she didn't belong here." Nathan's mind raced as he took in the horrifying scene. "Heather, put the knife down," he said, his voice shaking. Heather turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. "I did this for us," she said. "Now we can finally be together." Nathan moved slowly, trying to position himself between Heather and Hannah's lifeless form. "Heather, you've gone too far. This isn't love, it's madness." Heather's grip on the knife tightened. "No," she said, her voice rising. "You don't get to call this madness. You made me this way. You're the one who started this." Just then, the sound of sirens filled the air. Nathan had managed to call the police without Heather noticing. As the flashing lights illuminated the room, Heather dropped the knife and fell to her knees, sobbing. Heather was arrested that night, her tearful protests echoing in Nathan's ears long after she was taken away. Hannah was pronounced dead at the scene, her life cut short by Heather's obsession and Nathan's inability to stop it before it was too late. The small town of Brookhaven was left reeling, struggling to comprehend the tragedy that had unfolded in their quiet community. Nathan, consumed by guilt and grief, resigned from his coaching position and disappeared from public life. As for Heather, her trial became a media spectacle, a chilling tale of obsession, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of crossing forbidden lines. But for those who knew the true story, it was a sobering reminder of how quickly passion can turn into something far more dangerous. The tragedy of Nathan, Hannah, and Heather was a story no one in Brookhaven would ever forget. Inside the house, the air was still, the quiet punctuated only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Heather moved cautiously, her adrenaline surging as she stepped into the living room. The cozy home she had envied for so long now felt suffocating, each framed photo of Nathan and Hannah on the walls a silent taunt. She clutched the handgun tightly, her hands trembling as she rehearsed her confrontation. This wasn't just about Hannah, it was about reclaiming control of a life that had spun wildly out of her grasp. Hannah was in the kitchen, humming softly as she tidied up. She was oblivious to Heather's presence until she heard the creak of a floorboard behind her. Turning, she froze at the sight of Heather standing in the doorway, her expression a volatile mix of fury and desperation. "Heather?" Hannah's voice was steady, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "What are you doing here?" Heather took a step forward, raising the gun slightly. "I'm here to end this," she said, her voice shaking. "You've ruined everything. You took him away from me." Hannah's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Heather, please, put the gun down. We can talk about this." Heather let out a bitter laugh. "Talk? You think this is something we can just talk about? You don't understand. You've had everything handed to you, love, a home, a family. And me? I've had nothing. Nothing but lies and people who leave me." Hannah slowly moved closer, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I know you're hurting, Heather," she said gently. "But this isn't the way. Nathan, he's not worth this. Whatever he's told you, whatever promises he's made, he's lied to both of us." Heather's grip on the gun tightened, her knuckles white. "Don't talk about him like that. You don't know him like I do. He loves me, not you." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, though she refused to let them fall. "Heather, if he loved you, he wouldn't have left you. And if he truly loved me, he wouldn't have betrayed me. But this," she gestured to the gun, "this won't fix anything. It'll only destroy what's left." For a moment, Heather hesitated, her resolve wavering. But the rage that had been building inside her for months was too strong. "You don't get it," she whispered. "You never will." As Heather raised the gun fully, the front door suddenly opened. Nathan stepped inside, his face pale with shock as he took in the scene before him. "Heather, stop," he shouted, his voice breaking with panic. Heather turned to face him, her eyes wild. "You said you loved me," she cried. "You said I mattered to you." Nathan took a cautious step forward. "I was wrong, Heather. I hurt you, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But this isn't the answer. You're better than this." Heather shook her head violently, the gun now trembling in her hands. "No. You don't get to walk away from me again. You don't get to pretend like none of this happened." Nathan's voice softened, his eyes pleading. "Heather, please. Let's end this. Not like this." But Heather's finger twitched on the trigger, her emotions spiraling out of control. In that split second, Hannah lunged forward, grabbing Heather's wrist and twisting it. The gun went off, the deafening crack echoing through the house. The next moments were a blur. Heather screamed as the gun clattered to the floor, and Nathan rushed to subdue her. Hannah, clutching her arm where the bullet had grazed her, managed to stay on her feet, her adrenaline masking the pain. Nathan held Heather down as she thrashed and sobbed uncontrollably. "I just wanted him to love me," she cried, her voice broken. "I just wanted to matter." The sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder as the police arrived. Within minutes, officers were in the house, pulling Heather away in handcuffs. She didn't resist, her fight extinguished, her sobs the only sound she made as they led her out. Heather was charged with multiple crimes, including attempted murder and breaking and entering. Her trial captivated the small town of Brookhaven, a tragic tale of obsession and betrayal that left no one untouched. Nathan resigned from his position and left town, his life in ruins. His affair with Heather became public knowledge during the trial, and any remaining respect he had in the community was gone. Hannah, despite her injuries and heartbreak, found strength in the support of her family and friends. She filed for divorce and eventually moved away, determined to rebuild her life far from the shadows of her past. Heather, sentenced to 25 years in prison, became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how unchecked obsession can destroy not only lives but entire futures. The house on that quiet suburban street remained empty for years, a haunting reminder of the night obsession collided with tragedy, leaving only broken lives in its wake. By March 2014, Hannah had moved back in with her parents, seeking solace in their quiet countryside home. Her days were filled with therapy sessions, legal consultations, and trying to piece together a life shattered by betrayal and violence. Her once vibrant and warm personality was dimmed, her laughter replaced with cautious smiles. The community of Brookhaven mourned deeply. The loss of the young officer, whose funeral drew hundreds, became a rallying cry for stricter community safety measures. Candlelight vigils were held for the victims of that tragic night, and though Nathan's name was often left out of these remembrances, his shadow loomed over every conversation. Nathan had disappeared from public view shortly after resigning, but rumors about his whereabouts persisted. Some claimed he moved to a remote town in another state, while others speculated that he had left the country entirely. For Nathan, life had become a prison of regret and self-loathing. He spent his days in isolation, replaying every decision that led to the destruction of his marriage, his career, and the life of a young officer. He wrote countless letters to Hannah, apologizing, pleading for forgiveness, but never sent a single one. He knew deep down that some wounds were too deep to heal. By April 2014, he began attending therapy, attempting to confront the demons that had driven him into his affair and subsequent spiral. Though he made progress, the weight of his actions hung heavy over him, a constant reminder of the lives ruined by his choices. Hannah, on the other hand, channeled her grief into action. By the summer of 2014, she had joined a local advocacy group focused on supporting victims of domestic violence and stalking. Though her involvement started as a way to distract herself, she soon became a key voice in the organization, sharing her story to raise awareness about the dangers of unchecked obsession. Through her advocacy, Hannah found a renewed sense of purpose. She worked tirelessly to push for reforms in the school system, demanding better oversight of teacher-student relationships. Her efforts led to the implementation of stricter policies and mandatory training for educators on professional boundaries. Heather's tragic descent into violence left a complicated legacy. In death, she became a subject of debate. Some saw her as a villain, while others viewed her as a broken young woman failed by the adults in her life. Her story sparked conversations about mental health, the pressures on teenagers, and the lack of resources for at-risk youth. Brookhaven High implemented mandatory counseling sessions for students and created a mentorship program aimed at providing positive role models. By 2016, the events of January 15 were no longer front-page news, but they remained etched in the memories of those who lived through them. Hannah, now a certified counselor, had rebuilt her life. She lived in a small but cozy apartment, where she surrounded herself with plants, books, and photographs of loved ones. Though she rarely spoke of Nathan, she no longer carried the anger that once consumed her. Nathan, after years of self-imposed exile, reached out to Hannah in late 2016. He sent her a letter, his first attempt to contact her since the divorce. In it, he expressed his deep regret, not asking for forgiveness but hoping she had found peace. Hannah read the letter once, then placed it in a box alongside other remnants of her past. She chose not to respond, believing that some doors were better left closed. Brookhaven gradually returned to its quiet suburban rhythms, but the scars of that fateful night remained. The Ellis house was eventually sold to a young couple who knew little of its history, though neighbors often whispered about its past. The story of Nathan, Hannah, and Heather became a cautionary tale told in hushed tones, a reminder of how fragile the line between love, obsession, and destruction can be. For those who lived through it, the lesson was clear: the choices we make, no matter how small they seem, can ripple outward, shaping lives in ways we can never predict. As for Hannah, she stood as a testament to resilience, proof that even in the face of unimaginable loss, life could be rebuilt, one day, one choice, one act of courage at a time. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more captivating content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring you more incredible stories.